What is up, and welcome to the newest edition of the Bet Chicago Sports Podcast. I'm Shane Jackson. Joined with me again is Nick Dais of the Veteran Minimums Podcast. Nick was on the first edition of this podcast, and we decided to bring him back on not only because his season predictions are looking great after 1 month of the year. I'm just assuming they look great. I have no idea. But because he is a Giants fan, and the Bears and the Giants just played in a 20-12 final on Sunday. And since this is a Bears audience podcast, thought it was great to have someone on from the winning side as well. But first, Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I feel honored that I was the first and I've been called back to come on the show. It's cool. You've always shown love on social media, and I'm excited to finally connect with you in a couple of days, and we'll be hooping soon as well. So it's all fun, man.
Yeah, that is great to hear. Excited, especially about the hooping standpoint out here in Vegas. Remember, the Best Chicago Sports Podcast is presented by Caesar Sportsbook, the official odds partner of Caesar Sportsbook. If you have not signed up for an account with Caesar Sportsbook, all you have to do is scan the QR code in the lower right corner to do so, and you'll get that new user offer through Caesar Sportsbook. Let's start with the Giants-Bears. It was a 20-12 win for the Giants, and it was as ugly as that final score would indicate. I don't know if anybody expected anything different, but it was a lot to be desired on both ends. Nick, initial thoughts from the Giants moving now to 3-1 after the 20-12 win.
Might be one of the worst 3-1 teams of all time. It is. If you look at the resume of the teams they've beaten, the Titans win is aging pretty well, with the Titans now on a 2-game winning streak. However, the team outside of Saquon Barkley, it's nothing to be excited about. Shepard now out for the year. Once again, feels so bad for that dude. He tore his Achilles at the end of last season, has a miraculous comeback. I didn't expect him, Shane, to be back as, I thought he'd be a pup candidate, and maybe we see him in November. And you saw the emotion of the first touchdown that he scores against the Titans because, him and Saquon, there's a lot of turnover with the Giants. They're probably the two longest tenured Giant players at the moment. Off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it's just them two. And Kadarius Toney, he practices 3 days in a row and then he misses a month. And oh my God, Kenny Galladay, that is, I don't even want to talk about it because I'm in a great mood. But look, man, the Giants offense is Barkley doing a lot of the Barkley stuff that made him the number 2 overall pick in 2018. And Daniel Jones's best attribute, I've been saying it from day one, is his running ability. Outside of that, he's a very below average quarterback. So you saw the Giants just take advantage of some of the big flaws for the Bears. A really young roster, a team that is struggling against the run. I think the Giants had over 250 yards combined on the ground. And that was really it. The Giants seemed to do whatever they wanted on the ground. And there's still a lot of things that need to be corrected in Chicago.
Remember, if you are subscribed to the newsletter at DeBet's newsletter, I give out a few picks every day or every Sunday, every game day. And we went 2-1 on those. Khalil Herbert over rushing yards and under 21.5 points for the New York Giants, which only came through because of that missed field goal at the end that hit the upright. But also they wouldn't have had the opportunity if the Bears don't muff that punt. It was such a strange game. I rewatched it this morning. The Giants are running Wildcat for the final 8 minutes of that game because they don't have a quarterback. There was, I think, Bears had gave up 2 field goals in the second half. They still continue to be a better second half team than first half team, but they were not prepared for the bootleg at all in the first half. It led to a couple of different touchdowns. Justin Fields, I guess you could say he made progress, but that really says more about how he's been through the season and less so about Sunday. He had the lowest passing yards prop ever at FanDuel Sportsbook for this game at like 145, and he cleared that mark by the end of the third quarter. But again, I think that was, a couple big plays, and that probably says more about maybe what the way Justin Fields has played this season. I'm actually curious. I've said a lot about Justin Fields on this podcast through the first month here. As an outsider's perspective, looking at yesterday's game and maybe seeing some of the bits of the other games, what do you think are kind of the biggest issues with this passing offense and Justin Fields in particular?
I've been a defendant of Justin Fields, and I'm very much a defendant of all young quarterbacks that come into the league. You got to give them time, right? I know it's a very bland answer, but it really comes down to that. It's the only thing, sports, and in particular, like when you go from college to the NFL, it's the only thing in the world that like you get punished for being the best at your job, right? Like if you're a top prospect, chances are, unless there's wild trades that go down, like I was looking at the draft order right now, Shane, for next year. And right now the Eagles, because of a trade with the Saints, have the 4th overall pick. So unless it's an extreme circumstance like that, a lot of times you're going to a team that's 2-16 or 2-15, winless, 3-14, right? So you're going to a pretty crappy situation. And I think I've been adamant about this on my show. If I could, cheap plug Veterans Minimum.
Absolutely.
Justin Fields in the last 5 years, I would say, has been wrong the most of any quarterback coming into the league. The Bears have done nothing to help him. This offseason, they did nothing. You look at what the Jaguars did. Yeah, at the time, we all had the same take. Like, dude, $70 million for Christian Kirk. Ugh. Turns out that was a great move for Jacksonville. You find an offensive mind, which is another thing I'm pro for a young quarterback. It's you need, especially early on in the year, early on in his career, you need to give him an offensive mind. Eventually, when you become a Brady, a Mahomes, a Rodgers, this is a cream of the crop, or even Josh Allen, you can live with a defensive-minded coach as your head coach. But Justin Fields, man, it's just very unfortunate. It's Mooney, cool. He's a speedster. He's not really a number one on any other team, in my opinion, outside of Chicago and maybe like one other roster. He's a bona fide number 2 wide receiver. And that's really it, man. I think Justin Fields, it might end horribly for him in Chicago, but I really don't think it's going to be his fault. I think it's just the situation and the circumstance for him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Robert Phillips here commented on our show on YouTube. If you want to comment, remember you can comment on YouTube. Just read that Fields was under pressure on 51.4% of his dropbacks against the Giants. On plays where he was kept clean, he went 10 of 14 for 168 yards with a PFF grade of 90.3. Obviously, that was the storyline coming in. Wink Martindale, who came from the Ravens, likes to blitz a lot. He was always going to put pressure on Justin Fields because he did that in the matchup against Justin Fields last year. But I think that supports your point about Justin Fields. It's not about one thing in particular, right? There's a lot of things. There's a lot of factors at play here. They do not have the players around him to give him the best, put him in the best position, right? The receivers, if Darnell Mooney's your wide receiver 1, are limited, right? Offensive line, as the stats would say, is below average. And then there's, the play calling. There's conservative play calling. There's not trusting him as much. And then you can get into the factors of him at play, right? His progressions were a problem coming out of college, his reading progressions, and it remains a problem right now. But it's a lot of little factors into one. But I do agree with the sentiment maybe that you, at least right now, it feels like you give him more time, obviously this year as well. But like Tua had a pretty poor, first 2 years, right? And he gets in a situation that is more favorable in year 3 to start year 3. Obviously, small sample size for Tua, but that is looking better for that quarterback. So I don't know. I agree with the sentiment. Maybe you're talking different if the Bears are suddenly pick 1, 2, or 3, and you have a different choice to make. But for now, yeah, it feels like let go all in next year and maximize the situation around him and maybe give him another chance. But that was pretty depressing after a 2-2 start, I guess.
Yeah, man, and I love that you mentioned Tua because I think that's the prime example of a guy who nobody liked. About 3 months ago, not even like a month ago, people were like, we like this roster. But what did Miami do? They get Tyreek Hill. They have the luxury, like the Bears also, where they're not paying their quarterback yet. So you could afford a $30 million wide receiver. You go and you get offensive lineman in Armstead to help him. You go and you get a number 1 wide receiver out of college in Jalen Waddle. you get an offensive mind who, dude, if you're looking at San Francisco now, maybe McDaniel is the offensive genius that we think Kyle Shanahan is, because they're struggling a little bit too. And I know the quarterback change as well, but I just really think it comes down to that, man. And you just look at, I think the Tua example is the best example. It's a guy who, let's give him a chance to succeed. Don't do what teams did with Sam Darnold, what they did with Josh Rosen. And I know those guys are like basically out the league for the most part, but also you got to give these guys some help, man. It's very rare where Andrew Luck is going to come in, right? And Andrew Luck took a team that went 2-14 and then made the playoffs 4 straight years. But that's a rare alpha. Trevor Lawrence, the same thing. We had him to that standard of Andrew Luck. And then it's like, all right, dude, the Urban Meyer stuff was all chaotic, the off the field. And then, DJ Chark is your number 1 receiver. Congratulations. Like, what are you going to do? So, yeah, man, I love the Tua analogy, and the comp to that is that's what every team and every fan base should want their organization to do.
And next Thursday night, Bears Commanders. That will be a privilege for Thursday night football. Remember that. But yes, moving on from Tua and quarterbacks in good situations to, I think leads us into, let's talk about other games around the league. A quarterback who was put in a pretty favorable situation right from the jump was Lamar Jackson. Ravens-Bills was the game that everybody pretty much cared about, at least in the early slate, and it somewhat lived up to the hype, I would say. It looked like the Ravens were going to kind of run away with it, and then I think there was a chance for them to go up 21-3 at one point early in the game. They called an OPI, led to a field goal. It was 17-3 instead, and the Bills just kept inching their way back, and eventually were able to take the lead late in the game and win the game. But I think it was 23-20 was the final. Much will be made about the decision of the Ravens to go for it on that 4th down in the red zone rather than kick the field goal and take the 3 points to give yourself the lead. I think that's where we start, and probably the only thing that needs to be talked about from this game. What were your thoughts on that kind of decision?
Well, I need to add context before I give you this answer, Shane. I am not someone who, hindsight is 2020. I don't let that judge how I feel about certain things. Just in general is how I live my life, right? I'm so for going for it on 4th down. I'm so for putting pressure on the other team. And if I have a guy who's an elite guy, every day of the week, I always reference this on my show, and it's sort of become like one of the things that I'm known for. It's Aaron Rodgers gets a lot of crap for bad playoff performances or his playoff record. But what's always left out is this dude on 4 different occasions has either tied it to send it to overtime, or in overtime, he doesn't get to touch the ball and he has 4 losses on his resume. And it's like, dude, I'll never forget. And I was someone who was financially invested on the Packers that year when they lost to the Cardinals. So I'm still a little bit salty. They were like 40-1 when I took them in season that year. And it's like, dude, you throw the 2 Hail Marys on one drive to Jeff Janis and you have all this momentum. Why kick the PAT to send it to overtime when you know that there's a possibility where Rodgers is hot right now and we're not going to get a chance to touch the ball? And then what happens? Larry Fitzgerald breaks a 60-yard play, and then they score, and then, all right, Rodgers, that was dope, but no one remembers it unless you're someone like me who remembers these kind of things, right? But last year was the same thing when they asked, John Harbaugh asked Lamar, like, yo, Lamar, you want to go for it? He's like, yeah, let's do it, coach. It's like, yeah, that's what I want. I don't have Daniel Jones. I don't have Sam Darnold. I don't have Justin Fields. Sorry, I know this is a Chicago-based podcast, but I'm doing it with Justin Herbert, with Pat Mahomes, with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, who coming into this week, and I still think he is a legitimate candidate for the MVP. I'm going for that all the time, man. And then I love the response to that question by Harbaugh, where he's like, dude, if I kick the field goal, then Buffalo knows that they could play a little conservative. I want to go for the dagger because it puts less pressure on our defense and it changes the way Buffalo is going to approach that game. So, that's a little bit of my rant. I needed to add a little context so people, I hate when people just come on and like, oh, I never would have went for it. It's like, nah, dude, I'm going for that all the time. I love when the Giants did that week 1, bring it back to my team. They did it to the Titans. It's like, dude, you have no expectations this year. You're Brian Dable. You're a 6-point underdog on the road. Your first, yeah, man, let's go. Let's do it. No issues with it.
Yeah, so I'm generally an analytically driven person when it comes to my analysis and my fandom of sports. And this was analytics, right? Every public model that's out there gave the Ravens a 2 to 5% win probability advantage by going for it rather than taking the field goal. And yes, that may not sound like much, but just compared to sports betting, right? You're looking for that 2 to 5% edge, especially when you, from the football field perspective, when you're going against what everybody thinks is the Super Bowl favorite. Right? Like you're looking for those small edges to win the game. And anybody who is complaining about this decision, it hasn't been paying attention to the Ravens for the last 3 years. This is the choices they have made ever since Lamar Jackson has been given the reins to this offense. They were doing this last year with Tyler Huntley. Like this is who the Ravens have become in the last 3 years. I know Brandon Staley of the Chargers was like this kind of like analytics like king for last year, but like the Ravens have been that team for the last 3 years. And you're just not paying attention if you were surprised by the decision they made. So I don't have a problem with it. I liked John Harbaugh's response to it. The way he kind of worded it to say, well, now you're giving them 4 downs every time. And like just thinking about it without even math involved, you're like, yeah, give the Bills 4 chances to get 10 yards. That seems kind of stupid, right? And counting on that to get them a stop. I understand the Ravens defense played pretty well, but I agree. Like go for it when you have Lamar Jackson. He's thrown 2 red zone interceptions his entire career, both of them against the Bills. Like I would make that decision over and over again. I think they should have gone QB sneaker power much earlier in that series. But yeah, I don't disagree with the decision to go for it.
Yeah, and to add one more thing, John Harbaugh realizes that Buffalo is such a juggernaut on offense, and you have Josh Allen. And it's not 3 down territory there the rest of the way. It's 4 down territory. So yeah, I'd much rather go for it there. And because of the quarterback that you have and the quarterback you're going up against, I'm sure if the Ravens were playing Chicago, they're kicking a field goal there, right?
Yeah,
if they're playing the Giants, they're kicking a field goal there. But you're playing Josh Allen, you're playing Pat Mahomes. What was the stigma on Kansas City? You can't kick field goals against Kansas City. So what did the Chargers do last year? They went for it on 4th down every time they played, right? If you remember many years ago, Watson and the Texans, they were settling for field goals, and then it's that wild comeback down 24 that Kansas City had. So yeah, man, it's all context, dude. It's all context. If they were playing the Giants and they kicked a field goal, I'd have no issue. But if you kick a field goal against Buffalo, I have an issue. I'd rather you go for it.
Yeah, and in week 1, the Ravens had a 4th and short, and they punted it against the Jets, and everybody was like, whoa, what do the Ravens have become? And it's like, no, they're playing the Jets. They knew they were going to win this game eventually. Let's close this out, I think, with the Sunday Night Football game. The Chiefs kind of put up a whooping on the Bucs. It doesn't look like it from the final score perspective. 41-31 was the final, but it never really felt like the Bucs were in it, honestly, after the fumbling the kickoff return, right? The Chiefs go down and score really quickly. A couple plays later, it's 7-0, and it was like, okay, thanks for coming out, Bucs. So, what was your thought process on this game? I bet the Chiefs pretty much every which way. I bet them, every which way against the Colts. It didn't work out, but felt like they had the edge again in this matchup. And Patty Mahomes remains one of the better players in this sport, and that proved to be the case on Sunday night. What did you think about the Sunday Night Football game?
I mean, thou shalt not bet against Pat Mahomes as an underdog. 7-0-1 against the spread now in his career. It's going to be just like Brady, dude, moving forward, where you're not going to have these kind of spots to target a Mahomes as a dog. Kansas City in I don't want to say must win. That's the wrong term, but a huge revenge factor. Like I remember the year that they played in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and this is where like my preseason bias, I think the one big flaw that I have, Shane, and I would love to hear your response on this, is sometimes I'm so when I predicted that the Chiefs would go back to the Super Bowl, and then I had a futures ticket on them to go back to the Super Bowl. And look, this isn't a hot take. They were the favorite to go back, right? So it's like I'm holding on to this 8-1 ticket for them to win the Super Bowl the year that they go back against Tampa Bay. But my football knowledge and realizing like, dude, they're going to be without it's going to be 4 new starters on the O-line. You got the D-line there. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should take Tampa, but I'm like, nah, man, I got to validate this take I had back in August. And then you saw Kansas City, like that game really changed the infrastructure and the future of the Chiefs, because they went in there and said, look, it's dope to have Tyreek Hill and Kelsey and Watkins and all this speed, but if we're not protecting 1-5, it don't matter what we have out there. Mm-hmm. So that's what you saw Kansas City do last year. They addressed the offensive line, and now this new rebuilt offensive line, he only got pressured on 9 of 40 dropbacks. And how many of them were because Mahomes is holding the ball for too long, right? We don't know, because that's what makes him great. And I don't want to suppress his greatness by saying, dude, you can't be doing all this magical stuff that social media goes crazy for. So to me, I think it was a huge revenge game for Kansas City. They're looking at their division now, and it's not as strong as we thought coming into this, right? Like the 2 teams that are 2-2, the Broncos and the Chargers. You're like, am I crazy for liking Vegas more than both of them, even though they have losses and whatnot? So I think Kansas City, you just saw them go in there, pedal to the metal, didn't take their foot off the gas at all. And I think you could take a lot of solace in losing if you're Tampa Bay, because you see how good you could be if you have all your weapons. If you're throwing to Brashad Perriman and Cole Beasley, it's going to be rough. But if you got Julio, you got Godwin, you got Evans, that's a scary team to have to go play.
Yeah, and they're built long-term wise in a weak NFC to take advantage of this. So their best days are ahead of them. As for the Chiefs, They had the best player in the sport, full stop, talking about anybody else. Let's stop wasting airtime. It's Patrick Mahomes and then everybody else. Nick, remind everybody where they can find your work, because we got to get you out of here.
At Nick Dais 10 is where you can find everything me on social media. There's betting, there's sports takes, there's wrestling, anything that you're into, I might be posting about it. And then veteransminimum.com is where you can find everything from my show and my podcast.
He is Nick Dais. I do recommend following him everywhere. He's a really, really good follow, but also a good winner if you're looking for some UFC and football picks. Thank you so much, Nick, for jumping on this podcast. That'll do it for the Bet Chicago Sports Podcast, and I'll see you next time, probably on Thursday, when we preview the Thursday Night Football game and the rest of Week 5. See you next time.